Welcome back to Evermore YouTube channel. It's Chris back with the Aftermath. This is the show we do when the dust has settled from the post-match reaction to Newcastle United's latest game, which happened to be a frustrating draw at home last night against Spurs, a rubbish Spurs, a hapless Spurs really, that somehow managed to get an equaliser from the centre half of all people from what happened to be the slowest overhead stroke over shin kick you've ever seen in your life. So I've had a time to sleep on it. I've had a time to consume some content from my favorite creators, and I'm kind of at the same place really, if I'm brutally honest with you. I'm frustrated, and the title of this video is Consistently Inconsistent, and that is what Newcastle United's biggest problem is this season. You got a performance like Everton at the weekend that none of us expected. A lot of us went in there with trepidation, thinking maybe get a draw, possibly could lose the game, and then we'll get Spurs at home. We always turn up at home, we always play well and win the game. But it kind of went the other way around. We got the frustrating draw at home and the unsurprising victory away at Everton. So I can't figure out what's going on with Newcastle United this season. I really can't. I can't work it out. I don't think Eddie Howe truly knows his best starting 11. He's chopping and he's changing. And I think the biggest issue for this football club right now is that consistency and mentality in games. Bruno Guimaraes said it after the game. He said, you know, we need to have the right mentality. We cannot concede that goal. He was fuming at the end of the game, Bruno. You could see it in his post-match analysis. I think it was possibly because it was Romero who scored the goal. And we all know the Brazilian and the Argentinians despise each other. So I think he was probably more annoyed at that as well. But it took bringing Bruno Guimaraes on to ignite that game. Newcastle started really well, but we played really well in the first half. The confidence in the weekend was there. You know, on another night, Joe Litton's chance goes in, some of Louis Miley's shots go in, and we're 2-0 up, and all of a sudden we're cruising. But once again, we go 1-0 up and we just step back and we let teams back into it. And this weird mentality that's creeped into Newcastle United from the old Newcastle United that would go for a second, possibly go for a third, and then try and manage the game. We get one goal ahead and then we just seem to go, right, okay, let's manage the game. And in the Premier League, teams are too good for you to do that. You need a second goal to shut off games. I mean, Christ, look at City the other night. They were bloody 5-1 up, I think, and ended up being 5-4. The Premier League is capable of flipping the script on you and getting 2 or 3 goals back. So you need to get more goals than them. As daft as it sounds, like Kevin Keegan's mentality, score more goals than the opposition, you win the game. It's very, very simple. But Newcastle United seem to have lost their attacking threat this season. You know, you can say that's maybe linked to the Alexander Isak departure. Maybe it is. You know, you lose a player who's as dynamic and quick and explosive and creative as Alexander Isak was for Newcastle. You are going to feel that in some regard. But we didn't just lose Alexander Isak. Anthony Gordon's been massively off form for nearly a year and a half. You know, he comes off the bench yesterday, makes one good run and scores a penalty, and everyone's waxing lyrically about him. He needs to do more than that. He needs to be more consistent. Barnes started the game really well, looked dangerous, you know, up and down the left-hand side. Lewis Hall was magnificent, as I said in the post-match reaction, but Barnes faded. Again, I think if I could describe Newcastle's performance last night, it was like a firework, explosive, then burned bright, and then disappeared to nothing in the night sky, just nothing. And that's why Spurs got back into this game. Spurs weren't good. Spurs had nothing up front. Kolo Muani was dreadful. You know, just kind of snatching at chances with his little chin strap on. Richarlison spent more time diving than Tom Daly. They had no creativity in that side. They were just trying to kick their way to a point, and they ended up doing it in the end. And Bergvall was probably their most creative outlet, and we never marked him. No one followed him, you know. I just think we totally disappeared out of the game. The intensity burned out. We let them back in. Defensively, really poor last night. Malik Chow aside, as always, you know, who quick, strong, you know, able to snuff out chances, put in a couple of really good challenges and last-minute blocks. But Burn looked leggy last night as well from the weekend. Maybe a rotation would have been a smarter idea from Eddie Howe, bringing Fabian Schär back in and maybe letting Burn have a rest. I know he was suspended, so he did technically have a rest, but he looked leggy tonight, Dan Burn. I'm not saying it was Dan Burn's fault, but he's got to do better with the Romero chance. He gets right across him. He's got to do better there. And then all the defenders have to do better with the equaliser. You know, Ramsdale, the punch is weak. The reaction to it looks really slow as well. Now, whether he just thinks his defence is dealing with it and it's got past him before he's moved, and that's why the reaction looks so bad, I don't know. But overall, the management of that game for Newcastle was abysmal by the players and the manager. We went 5 at the back, and we invited more pressure on because of that. You know, that was a negative move from Eddie Howe in many ways. I'm not going to turn this into an Eddie bashing podcast, but that was negative by Eddie Howe. Spurs weren't great. Spurs were open for another one. We could have went 3-1 in that game if we pushed hard enough and fast enough, and we just didn't do it. I'd have probably left Barnes on the pitch and maybe moved Gordon into centre forward. As much as I don't like seeing him there, I think having Barnes and Gordon on the pitch at the same time with Elanga on the right, because Murphy was dog shit, absolute dog shit. It's one of the worst performances I've seen from Jacob Murphy. That's the inconsistency of Jacob Murphy that has made him one of the most frustrating players to watch over the years in Newcastle. Brilliant 1 minute, shite the next, and that's the issue. A lot of the players are like that. Joe Linton had bits of the moments of the game when he looked back, it was Joe Linton best, but he burnt out as well. Jacob Ramsey's not getting a sniff. Joe Willett could have come on and give us legs as well. And I just think the Fabian Schär substitution was negative. I know we were 2-1 and we're maybe fortunate to get the penalty. I still don't think you can bear hug something like that in 2025 football and expect anything other than a penalty. So Bentancur's got to know that. As Dan Burn would have had to know that if that was in our box as well. I'd have said the same thing. That is a pen in 2025. You can't be stupid like that. Mike Chow was maybe looking to get away with a couple as well at the other end, but Spurs scored the goal, so it didn't matter in the end. But it was weak game management against a pretty ordinary Spurs team, it must be said, who are in a really bad place. Awful result of the weekend. Fans booing them. Their fans. I'm part of the fan analysis setup, as you know, and you get to see the other fans' oppositions on the app, and they were predicting Newcastle would beat them 3-0. That's how negative the Spurs fans were. So they'll be over the moon with that. It might have made the late night travel back to London a little bit sweeter, getting a point where they didn't expect it. But just, it wasn't good enough from Newcastle overall. The game management wasn't good enough. And you can say that about a lot of games this season. The Arsenal game, the Liverpool game, certainly, West Ham and Brentford away were abysmal. The Brighton games. There's so many games this season where Newcastle have done the hard stuff, get a goal, open a team up, and then they can't just do the simple stuff like looking after the football. Looking after the football has been a real problem for Newcastle. I'm a big advocate of bringing players in who do that, like Louis Miley. I didn't think he had that bad of a game last night. I've seen a few people turn on him, but he did fade out of the game like a lot of other people did as well, more experienced players than him, and he did give the ball up, but so did Joe Linton, so did Jacob Murphy. Tonali even gave the ball away a few times before he went off in the half-time, which I'm not too sure about. I was maybe a little bit conspiracy theorist about Tonali in the post-match last night, saying that, is his performance dropping because he wants to move? But when he says the comments that he says, and then he puts in the performances that he's put in since those comments, you cannot help putting 2 and 2 together and, and making 6 kind of a thing, you know what I mean? And then that wasn't a good move from Tonali to do that. And that was a concern for me, that we haven't seen the same imperious performances from Tonali since those comments. But the team themselves haven't been good enough. They haven't managed games well enough. We've rotated the back 4. We've got the 2 wing backs back in the team, which definitely gives us, energy, gives us defensive cover. Lewis Hall was magnificent. I thought Tino was decent as well. Chow was good at centre half. The big question for me, and I'm not trying to say get Dan Burn out the side, but I thought Burn looked leggy, looked a bit awkward tonight against pretty much nothing from Spurs as well. Them 2 goals are dreadful. If you conceded them at pub team level, you'd be foaming. You'd be shouting at Big Terry or Big Gary saying, fuck you doing that, mate. And I think the players will be the same. They've got to take stock of those defensive frailties. And weird enough, we always say our defence and our midfield are the 2, kind of best stacked parts of our squad, but we can't look after the football and we're conceding sloppy goals. So if they're the 2 best stacked parts of our squad, what the hell's going wrong then? Is a refresh needed? Is complacency sneaking in? Do players just think they'll play regardless of their performances? And that's on the manager to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's the concern for me, is that, the same lads get in the side regardless if they make a mistake, if they have a bad few games, they just seem to be back in the side. He doesn't rotate unless he has to through injury. He has done with the midfield, and it's nice to see Miley get a couple of games, but he is a young lad and he's going to have a good game and a bad game and a good game and a bad game. He's not going to be consistent at 19. Very few players are, unless you're Wayne Rooney, Cristiano Ronaldo, Neymar, Messi, Jude Bellingham, Zidane. You start naming these world-class, brilliant, iconic footballers, and if Louis Miley's half the player those guys grew up to be, then he's going to be unbelievable for Newcastle. But you can't expect too much of a 19-year-old boy. But I thought, our big midfield trio didn't do enough. Sandro looks off. Something's not right with Sandro. I don't know what it is, whether he's playing through an injury like Botman was. And if that's the case, that's another howler from the medical staff. and it's a big concern. But Newcastle need to get some level of consistency back. I mean, it's very likely they might go and beat Burnley at the weekend and put in a great shift and a great performance, and then they'll go to the Stadium of Light and get absolutely hammered, because that just seems to be the level of inconsistency from this side of the season. But you don't get top 5 with this level of inconsistency. I'm sorry, you don't. The more Newcastle do this, the less chance, I believe, of them finishing in a top 5 position. Europe may be the best bet, might be to win a domestic cup this season if they can get through to finals and turn it on and win a cup. That might be the best way to do it. But I'm actually starting to wonder whether Newcastle even finish in the top 7, to be brutally honest with you. I've looked at the fixtures, you work them out, even if you're ultra positive, I'm not sure Newcastle even get past 63 points or 62 points or whatever. And last season, that was 8th. So that puts a bit of perspective in it for you. But there's work that needs to be done from the manager, from the players. I think the manager has to be a bit more positive with his tactical changes. I think he has to believe in his players. I think the players have to have the right mentality to close out games and to impose themselves on games, to get ahead enough to control games. We've got a lot of big players, international footballers, England internationals, Brazilian internationals, Italian internationals. We need those players to play at the level that we know they can play at, to win games like that last night, where the team was not great that we were playing against, and in the first half gave up so many chances. We should have beat them 3 or 4-0, and we couldn't muster it up. And in the Premier League, it's unforgiving. If you don't take those chances, you don't get it. Voldemort looked really tired, I felt, last night. He started bright again, like fireworks syndrome, burned out. He was probably knackered from about 55 minutes onwards. His touch was sloppy, his movement was slow, and that's what happens when you don't have a Johan Visser or even a Willis Sula on the bench to come on and add energy. So this squad is light, and I'm honestly, I think they need to add in January as well, because we haven't got enough to protect the players that we need to, from burnout, from fatigue and injury, or to change games when we feel it slipping away defensively or offensively. So it is a bit concerning, but hopefully the lads can turn it on against Burnley, get back to winning ways. And then the Sunderland game is absolutely huge, even bigger than it needs to be. I'm not even bothered about the Champions League, if I'm honest with you. Leverkusen will be what it will be. I'm more interested in the Premier League football. But let me know in the comments below what you guys think about this level of inconsistency. What does a manager need to do to change it? What do the players need to do to change it? Always like to hear from you. Remember to like and subscribe. Keep it ever more. We'll be back with some more banter soon. We've got the preview for Burnley, and then we'll be live post-match after that. Mark will be with you for Leverkusen next week, because I'm away, but then I will be back for the derby. My God, I'm shitting myself about that game. I'm really, really concerned about it. Let me know about all of those thoughts. Have a belter. Enjoy your day. See you later.
Heroes celebrate. They have done it.